And so now we're into module 3.2, and where we will pick up, we introduced emotional intelligence last week at the end of class and talked about that and what it is. And so we'll start getting into two of the four elements, dimensions of emotional intelligence, self-awareness and self-management. We'll jump into that tonight. Don't have until I'm about to get into here. From an agenda standpoint, exam 2 was yesterday. I think I just finished grading it because there was the fill in the blank or short answer one at the very end that didn't automatically grade. I finished grading all those right before class, so I have not looked at the statistics on questions, so the grades may or may not be final. If there's any of the questions that look sketchy or confusing based on how if a lot of people chose the same wrong answer or something like that, then sometimes I'll adjust it. I haven't had a chance to look at that. And I think there's one person that's still left to take it that they contacted me ahead of time. So we'll discuss next week if you have questions on it, if that's cool. I did get some feedback from a couple of different people that it was an entertaining exam. So sometimes I forget what I entertain myself when I'm making them. So we'll get into we introduced emotional intelligence last week, and I said, and when I got into the point in my career where organizations were starting to ask for leadership training, and we start to look at different types of leadership training that are out there, and these are topics that tend to pop up. And emotional intelligence was at the time just one more of those topics that I decided, hey, let's put that in. And then the more and more I dove into emotional intelligence, I realized all of these other topics fit into emotional intelligence. It's not just one more topic. To me, it is from the people side of leadership, the most critical aspect of leading an organization. And so there's two dimensions of emotional intelligence: the self-competence dimension, which we'll talk about today. There's self-awareness, and then self-management or self-regulation. And then there's the social aspect, the social competence, which is how aware am I of other people, and how can I use emotional intelligence to build stronger, trusting relationships, which in the aspect of the work world is what we're looking to do. So we'll get into the self side of things tonight with self-awareness and self-management. But like I said, there's topics that are popular in leadership that we're going to hit under all of those over the next 3 classes, and also revisit the remaining parts of the 5th discipline that we haven't talked about, because they fit nicely as well. There's of the 5 disciplines now, we've talked about the 5th discipline first, which was systems thinking. We talked about mental models. We talked about shared vision in module 2. And then we'll talk about personal mastery under self-management. And then we'll talk about team learning in the last class. So they all kind of also fall nicely into categories of emotional intelligence. So the building block of emotional intelligence in the very beginning is self-awareness, because there's the 4 pieces of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-regulation. If I'm not aware, I don't know what I need to regulate or manage. Then there's social awareness. The more self-aware I am, the better I can be at social awareness. And so they all interact ultimately for what we're in a work world looking to do, and that's develop stronger trusting relationships. So Self-awareness, the building block of emotional intelligence, is our ability in real time to be able to detect our own emotions and process them in the context in which they're happening. And the research from Emotional Intelligence 2.0, which I no longer make required, but I like to touch on some of their stuff, shows that 83% of people with high self-awareness tend to be top performers. And very rarely do they perform in the bottom. So critical skill, self-awareness. How well can I, in real time, identify my emotions and understand why they're happening? So I think I've mentioned many times, especially for those of you that have had me in multiple classes, which is probably just about everybody at this point, that my background was in lean manufacturing in the Toyota system. And a big part of lean is learning to identify and eliminate waste, or the Japanese term for that is muda. It is so fundamental that when the pioneer of the Toyota production system, a guy named Taiichi Ohno, developed it in the 1950s, he came up with 7 categories of muda, and with the whole idea of, if I can train my people to see the waste and putting names on it in categories will help people to identify them, then the greater the chances of them being able to come up with ways to eliminate. So based on that, the first step to understanding emotions, self-awareness, identifying our emotions, is to know what they are, know what the basic emotions are, and then understand the nature. I don't have children. Does anybody know who these folks are?
Yeah, those was Inside Out.
Inside Out. Now, apparently there's a second one now.
Yes. Yeah, it just came
with even more complex emotions. But yeah, I guess Inside Out is these characters, the personification of emotions. And I guess, so the way I learned it and the way I cover it, there's 6 universal basic emotions. Depending on your sources, some may say 5, up to 8, but we'll roll with 6. So the 5 that are foundational to the Inside Outs and this guy over here that we'll talk about are the ones that I use. So I want to introduce them just from the beginning. The first base emotion that we have is happiness. And happiness comes from when we gain something that is desirable. Oh, that's nice. Even if it's something small, we experience that emotion. What happiness does is gives us a lighter feeling that makes us comfortable exploring. Makes us a little curious. And so happiness, more than any other emotion, increases performance because it changes the chemical makeup in a way that makes us more exploratory, and ultimately that increases innovation that we talked about earlier in the semester. Happiness. People are been shown in research more creative, 3 times more creative and better problem solvers when they're in a happier state.
Did you define happy?
Gaining something of value. The emotion of happiness, the way it's defined in psychology theory, is the feeling you get when you gain something you desire. Doesn't have to be a tangible thing. It could be a gain in status.
And it could be something.
It could be finding your keys.
It's got to be something that somebody else disregards, but you find it valuable.
Sure. It could be a like in social media. Ooh, I got 10 likes. 34 people looked at my LinkedIn. Ooh, I like that. But the emotional happiness tends to happen because of that. You gain something of value. And the opposite of happiness is sadness. Let me get that laser dot off her face there. So sadness, by the juxtaposition of happiness, is when we lose something that we value. And then we have heaviness and gives us the desire to give up. And again, these are just the base emotions right now. And we'll look at how emotions branch off of that in a moment. Third emotion is surprise. And surprise is when we are on alert because something has happened. Oh, didn't expect that. Oh, the camera's not. Tuesday, that surprised me. Today it's made me happy. Oh, I don't have to be on camera. Yeah. It makes you pay attention. It makes you try to focus what's happening, what's going on. Why is that? And then there's our old buddy anger. The emotion of anger. And anger is when we are prevented from getting something or achieving something that we desire. There's a block there. And so our tendency of behavior is to either fight or disengage from that. Fight or flight. And then there's fear, which also creates the behavior of fight or flight, but the feeling when we have fear is that comes when we detect that there's a possible threat. And again, that could be something physical. Oh, there's a snake over in the corner. Or it can be something that makes us uncomfortable with status. Oh, they just hired somebody new with my capabilities. Makes me a little uneasy and fearful.
Can you define possible threat?
I think it could be anything that makes you feel that your current situation can be compromised or something that you desire to be compromised.
Just.
And the sixth one is disgust, which is when we have implied rules that have been broken. Does anyone have Dr. Vager? So she's very German, right? And so Dr. Vager and I and one of our collaborators, one of the professors in computer science, Dr. Manon, and they're friends, and Dr. Manon was doing her sabbatical in Germany last fall, and Dr. Vager was visiting her family in Germany, and at some point they crossed paths and were able, and she's like, oh, I want you to meet my family. And I don't know, Ben, you had said you hadn't talked to Manon again, right? She's got a big personality. She's got a big presence. And she's just positive when she's in the room, like she owns it, like there's just an energy about her. And so Dr. Vager was telling me she's with her dad and they're there to meet Dr. Manon in Germany. Germans very much appreciate rules. And Dr. Manon comes out of nowhere with luggage and she's crossing the street, not at the crosswalk, and she's screaming really, hey, I'm over here. And Dr. Vager's like, her dad's like, who is this? It was the experience of you're breaking rules. What do you cross the road down there? You don't yell across the street at people. And just knowing the two of them and imagining that interaction makes me laugh, but then every time she and I do this training with industry together, and we tell that story when we talk about disgust, is it doesn't have to be that, but it's the, wait, that's not the way you're supposed to do that. So we tend to try to reject that situation.
So when you
For the
say,
people involved.
you say implied as opposed to inferred. And aren't, I guess, are societal rules, are they, is that where we get like shame and whatnot like that? Is that like, is that implied or inferred? And then people take it as their own and therefore imply it, and therefore you get discussed as a group, macro level. Like, is it all internal? Is it all internal or is it external?
Yeah, I think emotions, for the most part, happen at the individual level. What norms can be defined can certainly have to some degree macro. And I think if you look at just the situation that I used, I have to destroy this video after class and hope that my colleagues never hear me talking about them. But I know, I mean, I'm very well. I know she certainly was not meaning to break rules.
Mhm.
She's from a different culture in a different area without that understanding.
Yeah, I actually grew up in Germany. I spent 4 years in Germany as a child. And you're exactly right. They would look at you, they follow the rules.
There are different parts in the country here that different behaviors are different cities, right? Like you can travel, I never know. Like there's some cities where you absolutely better wait until the crosswalk turns for the little walking person before you cross. And there's some where it's like, oh, nothing's coming, it's cool. I'll go. So when I'm in a different city that I've not used to, I will observe the norms of what people tend to be.
And there's some cities where nobody's following the rules.
Yep.
On the road.
Yep.
I think it's implied, it can either come from your own internal things, it can come from society, it can come from true, explicit, laws or whatever, I don't think it's, I think it is how the individual implies something, because like I might get disgusted at a spider climbing up the wall, but that's internal, but there's nothing external that's feeding that.
Yeah. And it could be, the same feeling could be if you expected your roommates to wash the dishes and they didn't. It's like there's no real rule there, but it was like it was an expectation or something that they may not have even
But
known.
it's no mistake that certain regions, as you mentioned, certain countries, regions, cities, whatever, have certain, at least commonly accepted rules. That's not a coincidence. So
Right.
this area, we over here, we do it like that, right?
Yeah.
Everybody didn't have to necessarily. You talk about being from North Alabama, rural North Alabama, right? There's certain norms in that area that may not be normal to here, over here, whatever, right? Is it just everybody's adopting it, or is it just that there are in fact external forces that are at play? Not necessarily good or bad, but just saying, are there, like, because you're from here, because you're from a place and the norms of that you will to some degree adhere to that thing?
Yeah, and I think that's a sociology question.
Okay,
I'm not a qualified.
I'm sorry.
I'm an engineer, man. I mean, I can give my opinions on culture, and I think like next week we'll talk about social awareness, where you definitely should be aware of it. And one thing that we'll look at a little bit today and more next week is the ability to understand. And I usually say understanding breeds acceptance a lot of times. If you understand there's differences, and we're going to talk about something very basic a little later, personality types. And if you understand them, it helps you understand different types of people. if you understand they exist, and maybe you're a little more willing to accept it. Same thing. You also, like, part of social awareness is you have to be aware of things like that. That's another aspect of emotional intelligence, especially when there's different cultures involved. I've done a lot of work with Japanese organizations, and the cultures are just different in those organizations. But then watching a Japanese company try to establish Japanese culture in an Alabama region creates its own culture. That's a different than either of those individually.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that, radical candor. She had mentioned that, like, in Japan, how they did, in Israel, they would push back against the leadership, but in Japan, it was like they.
Yeah.
She really got a problem trying to get them to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, we do this training for leadership at Mazda Toyota, and it's always fun because an activity we'll do is separating groups and say, I want y'all to talk about the Alabama culture. I want y'all to talk, because a lot of the leadership gets sent to Japan, and talk about the differences. Are there any similarities? How has that influenced the organizational culture here at your company? And it's all very interesting stuff. But on the emotion side, from a self-awareness standpoint, just being able to detect what they are, the basic ones at the beginning, but then also realize that those are just the central core, and that more complex emotions start to branch off of that.
Yeah, in that movie, Inside Out, what
Mhm.
happens is, in the first one, like, it's a adolescent, it's like a small child, and then as she reaches, like, puberty, some new emotions come out. I forgot which ones. It's like two, I think.
She gets anxiety.
There's a couple more that she doesn't have when she's
Yeah.
young, because she's not mature enough, something to that effect.
Yeah.
They both like touch it and it turns like both yellow and blue for like happy and sad emotions. And
Yeah.
like they all kind of go together.
Yeah, so they do start to interact, and they do start to branch off as that's really interesting, not seeing the movie, but like as you cognitively develop
Mhm.
as humans, you gain the ability to process more complex emotions.
Mhm.
And emotions are not simple. A dog, depending on the breed and the age, an adult dog roughly has the cognitive complexity of a 2 to 4 year old human. They understand basic emotions. We may project that they feel second level emotions, but dogs don't really feel guilt. They can feel sad, but they don't really have that next level of, why am I sad? Oh, what is the guilt? Now, they may project reactions based on what they are picking up from us, but they really don't care that they chewed your shoe up.
That makes sense, because like little babies, especially like little babies, like they go from that core, like they might go from happy to sad in a second. Like they might cry and then they might be happy. They might, it's like they're only really on that little area right there.
And another thing to remember, right, that like those are basic. As we cognitively develop, we can feel these at different levels, but it's also important to understand that some of them can be both positive and negative.
Yeah.
So like surprise, it could be something exciting. We could have walked in and y'all would have said, "Hey, Dr. Lloyd, congratulations. We're chosen you as whatever, and this is great. Yay, here's your lifetime supply of whiskey."
I don't think any of them are really necessarily good or bad.
Startled could be good, or it could be bad.
Yeah.
It could be like, "Boo, what?" And then you turn around and it's someone that you haven't seen for a long time that makes you happy. Or it could be, "Hey, there's a snake hole right there
Or a surprise birthday party. You'd be like,
yeah, which can make people happy or angry, depending on the individual, right? I have a niece who is 20 something, and she cried when she was young every time happy birthday was sang, and she still does. And it's like, one day we'll quit doing this. So understanding, being able to identify emotions and understand that they can get more complex and understand that they're not all negative. And we're going to get into, I think next week when we talk about social awareness, picking up on other people's body language. And I've got a participation badge where with an article on different emotions and then ways to channel it. So like even I think part of self-awareness to me when it comes to emotional intelligence is accurately identifying which emotions you're feeling so you can properly channel behaviors. So anger. Depending on where you're from and how you were raised, it could potentially be that, oh, anger is something you're not supposed to feel. So suppress it. But and we're going to we actually looked at it last week. At the fundamental level, you can't help how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Feelings happen at where we sense the spinal cord, the base of the brain, the amygdala. You can't help how you behave. That difference is emotional intelligence. So given that I feel anger, if I can learn to be self-aware and go, I feel this. The parts of the brain that are activated with anger are the same ones that use the energy to critically think. So if you ever have heard the phrase, I'm so mad I can't think, it's because it's true that your brain. So, but how can you channel anger in a positive way? It's actually an emotion that is very productive.
Right.
So yeah, getting things done that don't require a lot of thought, cleaning, knocking out easy checklist on your to-do list that you've been putting off because you're trying to do complicated things. And all of a sudden something you feel anger and it's like, you know what, I'm going to put this aside because I'm not going to work on next assignment because that requires thinking a lot. But now that I'm feeling anger, I'm thinking of next assignment and I'm mad at him, I'm going to go knock these things out that can be productive. Or yeah, hit the heavy bag, whatever, get a good workout in. Another part of self-awareness, understanding how we see the world. What do y'all see in this picture? Let me get this
That lady's wrong.
wrong.
She did it. She did it.
Oh. What makes us think she's wrong?
Well, she got her hand on her chest. She's like she's defensive. The other, everybody's looking at her, right? And the guy over there, I'm really just joking out.
No.
But the guy with the pie charts over there,
Yeah.
he's saying, hey, I didn't do it, right? So and it's got to be something.
Didn't do it. I brought pictures to prove it.
Right, like I didn't do
Got
that.
a craft.
Here's the evidence, and she's like, well, look, she looks defensive, right? With the hand right there.
See anybody else see anything different?
I feel like they're collaborating and she's giving her opinion.
So it could be a collaboration, right? We don't know. This isn't like one thing that I'm going to say, this is what was really happening. She very well could be saying he could be wrong. And she's saying, I'm the boss. You're crazy. You were supposed to have this. This guy looks like he doesn't have teeth.
He's got the charts though. So
He's got the charts.
that guy's obviously in charge. Well,
He's trying to give the body posture that he is. So maybe he just has low self-esteem and read a book that says if you do this, people think you're strong. We don't know, right? So if we go back to the first module, one of the disciplines of the fifth discipline was mental models, right? Consciously, very often subconsciously, our brain is telling us information about the outside world that often we don't even question. But someone else could see it completely differently based on their reference. Somebody may say, oh, she's wrong, she's defensive. Somebody may say, hey, she's blessing that guy out because he got something wrong. We don't know we don't have enough information in this case, but I like to use that to get people to thinking that other people see things different ways, and that's all part of self-awareness, is understanding our mental models. Something about our unconscious mental models make our brain take shortcuts to make interpretations about things just like this. So being able to understand that from the beginning is a huge part of self-awareness. So in the fifth discipline in chapter 9, in the discussion of mental models, which we talked about a good bit in class 1.4 or 5, I can't remember, or maybe both. In the fifth discipline, Peter Senge promotes or suggests different skills of reflection and inquiry that can help us more properly understand and frame our mental models to something a little more realistic. And so some of those are spouse theory versus theory in use, which is the difference in what we say we believe and what we actually do. That will help us with some self-awareness. If I can fully start to understand, well, I'm professing that I believe in this, but if you look at my behaviors, there's a disconnect between those.
So, and we may can talk about this offline, but I had an issue with the fifth discipline because he had he kind of contradicted himself. Because he talked about he kind of got really political and talked about, how socialism was bad and stuff like that. You could tell it where he was from, where he was coming from, which is fine. But then he talked about
written in 1990, I think.
But I mean, he's older though. You could tell he was from that Cold War,
Yep.
Which is fine, whatever. But he kind of went down a little triad about, socialism bad, and you can see the difference between, USSR and the United States. But then he turned around and talked about how in Scandinavia, the healthcare, I think it was the health system and stuff was so good. Well, the Scandinavian system is socialist. So I thought that was a bit, and he talked about Social Security, I believe. It's been a minute since I read it. So I just thought that was a bit of I've been meaning to ask that for a long time. I was way late. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I didn't write it.
Yeah.
So part of, he talks about the skills of reflection and inquiry. One of them's spouse theory versus theory in use. So that helps our self-awareness if we are open to questioning that. We're going to look at some exercises from a leadership standpoint from When They Win, You Win that can help with that. Recognizing leaps of abstraction, which we'll look at in a minute. Exposing the left-hand column, we'll look at that in a couple of weeks with relationship management and communication skills. And in balancing inquiry, our willingness to stand for what we believe with our inquiry advocacy is standing for what I believe versus inquiry, which is being open to what you believe. And looking for not to win the argument, but come up with the right argument together. And so I think when we talked about that earlier in the semester, we introduced the term intellectual humility, which I was introduced to by one of our new psychology professors last year. She was doing work on intellectual humility, and I was like, what the heck is that? It was like I work in academia and where people have neither intellect or humility. And they seem like an oxymoron. And so she explained it. And then I was like, oh, that's what Peter Senge calls balancing advocacy with inquiry, which is being intellectually arrogant is saying, I'm never going to be wrong. I'm not going to change. It doesn't even matter what you say. Being gullible is I'm so open to anyone's opinion that I will bounce around in what I believe on a whim without even thinking what I think. But being intellectually humble is being strong in what you believe, but also have the willingness and the openness and the curiosity to listen to others. And when presented with strong evidence, be willing to shift your views, while also being willing to present your own evidence. Again, not to win an argument, but to learn and get more closer to accuracy. So when I heard the term intellectual humility and then it was explained to me, I was like, oh, that's what Singy in the fifth discipline called balance and advocacy and inquiry. That's what I was afraid was going to happen. When the agenda wasn't on there, and I'm like, oh, I put the student version of the slides on my lecture. I will post the ones with the real words on it later. Now this will be fun for me. See if I know what I'm talking about. Recognize leaps of abstraction. It's what the blank should be. I'll post the filled in ones later. Leaps of abstraction is, can I recognize when my brain is jumping from a specific situation to making a generalization based on my mental models or something, and how willing am I to say, I identify that, and then still question each specific case against that generalization, and not just let the generalization take over. Leaps of abstraction. I could jump if Laura, the first time I met her, might have been in a bad mood and ignored somebody, and I made a leap of abstraction that says, well, she doesn't care about people. And all of a sudden, I've branded Laura as someone who doesn't care about people. Or am I willing to file that away as one piece of information and judge it on the larger body of work?
Is it like the halo and orange?
Yeah, could be. Got both of them working sometimes. Or with a guy, and I later heard people who salt their food before eating make rash decisions. I later was told Henry Ford said that. I don't know. He was around before me. But I do know that I was working with a company in Denver, outside of Denver, Commerce City, Colorado, had a small steel manufacturing plant. And the president of the company took us out to dinner that night. This was an interesting dude. His dad had founded the company and passed away. This guy was kind of in his 50s, midlife crisis age, driving his Porsche around and liked to talk about himself. But he took us out to dinner. He liked to be profound, and he was saying, one thing I do when I'm interviewing people for a job is I'll take them to lunch and I'll watch them. And if they salt their food, I will never hire them.
You mean salt the food before they taste it, or just if they salt it?
Before they taste.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, as I'm probably salting my food because I grew up poor, and if you salt bad food enough, at least it tastes like salt, and you know what you're dealing with. And he said, that means I won't hire someone who salts their food before they taste it, because that means they make rash decisions. And I remember thinking, that seems like an awfully rash decision, sir, to judge somebody on if they like salt on their food or not. But okay. But that's a generalization. That's a leap of abstraction that may not have evidence to back it.
I mean, so rule of thumbs, right? They're not always probably right, but like wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Wearing a seatbelt most of the time is a good thing. On those few rare occasions, wearing a seatbelt will get you trapped in the car and die. Right?
Mhm.
But so I mean, we live a life based on leaps to some degree, right?
Mhm.
So we have to determine where, how much leaping we want to do, or
So I think that's risk, and that's more of a personality preference, and we'll get to that in a minute. This specifically is talking about recognizing our brain's tendency to make shortcuts from generalizations, because Dr. Baker tells me all the time, our brain is lazy, so it tries to be on autopilot. It tries to be on cruise control so that it's not having to pay attention and adjust the speed all the time based on things around it, so that it can free up resources to do things that it's not used to. But that can also cause us to overgeneralize things and discount Laura, or not hire somebody really brilliant just because they like to salt their food.
they got high blood pressure.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to self-awareness, and the fifth discipline talked about with mental models, and understanding our mental models is part of self-awareness, but then the skills of inquiry and reflection in the chapter 9 are to help us better understand and properly frame our mental model. And one of those is identifying leaps of abstraction. There's a psychologist and Dr. David Burns, a psychiatrist who has a lot of work. And one of is a workbook called 10 Days to Improve Self-Esteem. But one of the things that stood out to me in some of his work is his idea of recognizing distorted thoughts and reframing them as something a little more reasonable. And that's part of self-awareness too. If I have all or nothing thinking, in other words, I view everything in absolutes. They love me or they hate me, where in reality, they probably don't even notice. And putting that overgeneralization, which is leaps of abstractions. Mental filter. Oh, we get SIE. So hundreds of people in my job get to tell us how good or bad I am every single year. And I could focus just on a small percentage that might tell me I'm good and think I'm great and ignore the others. Or I could say, only focus on the small percentage, maybe that's negative, without seeing all the positives. And that's mental filters. And so identifying if you have distorted thoughts. Number 8, very often, is a good way to reframe your mental models. Identify when your thoughts use the term should or must. Just say things to yourself and then try to answer it. To be happy, I must. Fill in the blank. Or should. To be happy, I should or I must. To be successful, I must. For me to be happy, you must. And then make this little adjustment after you dwell on that. And instead of saying must, replace that with I would prefer that. For me to be happy, I would prefer that. Fill in the blank. And just making that one shift between must and I prefer makes you potentially reframe that thought into loosening it up.
Don't.
Words do matter. They matter a lot. Depersonalizing things, which is something that Radical Candor talks about a lot. If you take yourself back to EM 660 and it says praise and criticism, don't make it personal. Instead of saying you did this, I observed that this situation happened. So I thought that was eye-opening when I was introduced to that, recognizing distorted thinking and then taking the time to question that and reframe it into something a little more reasonable. And also part of emotional detection, emotional awareness, self-awareness, is once you understand emotions, different ones, anger, happiness, despair, depression, anxiety, pay attention to your body and physical signs that you yourself have. And sometimes you can detect something that's making you feel a certain way before you actually detect the emotion itself. I can tell now in reflection and after trying to spend time in retrospect and be retrospective myself, introspective, that if my jaw is sore, then I probably was stressed and mad at something that day because I tend to clench my teeth when I get mad or frustrated. So sometimes people feel heat, rapid breathing. If I'm happy, I tend maybe to look around more, head is up. And so sometimes you may not even realize you're feeling a certain way until it's pointed out. Hey, you're looking upward. We're usually in a good mood if we're thinking and we're looking upward. We're hoping towards something positive. It's the stuff I catch myself doing that before I was told about it, I would have never thought about. If we look downward and you're not looking at your notes or something, if for no reason you find yourself looking downward in thought, very often you're worrying about something. Thinking about something in the past or thinking about something that is negative or is holding you down, something that brings you anxiety. So if you can start to find these signs in yourself, it's another way of detecting that you're feeling a certain type of emotion, and which is part of self-awareness. The quicker in real time you can detect emotions that you're feeling, the more responsibly you'll be able to manage your behaviors based on those emotions. Talk about mental models, right? Like we looked at them way back in class 1.5. And now that we're in emotional intelligence, which is probably not the most common topic to be taught in an engineering course, if I had to guess, but it certainly, maybe even in a business leadership course, but like I do find it absolutely important. As a guy who grew up in the South, in a Southern Baptist church even, as a male, like, what do you think my mental model growing up of emotions were?
Stuff them down.
You don't have them, right? What are those things? You can't express them. Can't even acknowledge that you feel them. Which is definitely the case. And then going into engineering, that only reinforces that. So having whether you want to admit it or not, we all experience emotions. Being able to detect what's behind them when they're happening is the first step to emotional intelligence. Because remember, we talked about last week the three parts of the person and our psyche. There is IQ, which is relatively fixed after a young age. Our ability to learn, detect patterns, critically think doesn't tend to improve. It can get lower if you have a brain injury or something. Certainly, IQ can lower.
It can actually increase.
You can learn more. Your ability to learn.
No, there have been people who've had injuries, head injuries, and then all of a sudden they're like, it's rare, but yeah.
Some people I would like to try that out on. It can't be worse.
I don't think it works.
Find it interesting, you've got your non-verbal, your quantitative, your verbal. I guess engineers are called jagged, have a jagged profile, but they're not as good verbally. They are very good quantitatively and non-verbally.
Yeah.
But that is a generalization though.
It is. I think certain people are drawn to certain professions for that.
True. If you're not good at English, writing essays, you can't be cheating.
That's right. That's exactly how I get here.
That's how I got it.
Yep. Numbers make sense. Words do not. I can't spell. So being able to identify them, because emotions are there whether we acknowledge them or not. So part of self-awareness, the building block of emotional intelligence, is identifying it. So what in the world does that mean to us? This is a fun little experiment. Teaching with the blanks on the slides. What does this mean to us in the work world? So let's visit going back to when they win, you win. And in that part of the book where he talks about, I think there's the giving direction, coaching, and career development are the three skills of organization. Yeah, the big three. And then part of career is the three conversations that every leader should be having with each member on their team. And we touched a little bit on this in Radical Candor, but he goes into a lot more detail of the mechanics of how to have these conversations and when they win, you win.
What drives
Hmm.
them? What drives? This one.
Start with the past, the life story. That helps you. I'll go ahead and fill in the blanks. That helps you understand people's values, which is what drives them. Having the life story helps you understand someone's past, not to be nosy, but to understand their real values. The second conversation is to talk about the future. What are the dreams? What do you want to achieve in your career? That helps define the vision. So see these same terms that we talk about in strategic planning at the personal level now, right? And how can I, when I'm having these conversations as a leader, try to understand where each person on my team is looking to go with their career? Because then that helps me understand their vision. And we'll look at more detail the mechanics of these. And then once I know in the future where they want to go, how can I, as a leader, come up with and help identify actions to work toward that I can help them work toward that dream job.
We'll do the what?
Yeah, and every action needs to have a who and a when, right? So the three life stories are the three conversations a leader should be having. The life story conversation helps you understand people's values. What is your dream job? We're talking to the future. That helps me understand where someone's wanting to go. And then how can I help you get there? The action plan. What are actions we can take that I can take, you can take? When are we going to do it? Work toward that dream job. And if I'm having those three conversations, the chances that I am a good leader are much greater. An effective manager is what Russell Arroway calls it. And when they win, you win. The three big skills, career conversations is one of them. Giving direction, which we talked about in module 2, and coaching, which we'll talk about later in this chapter, lead to engagement, which is an indicator of managerial effectiveness. So, and which lead to results. So, in trying out these conversations and tying this into, and I know this emotional intelligence, what I realized is these are not easy conversations to have at all. So going back to radical candor, what has to happen? You have to have trusting relationships for these conversations to be effective. What I also found out is that having these conversations with myself first sure did help facilitate those conversations.
So, one thing, for a while, a couple of years ago, I used to drive Uber. I find that people will tell you a lot of this stuff being either a complete stranger or somebody they didn't trust a lot. There's no in between though. But people will tell you their life story and their dreams. If you are a complete stranger, they know they're not going to see you again.
Right. Bartender, when you're out of town.
Yeah, they'll tell you stuff that they wouldn't tell their mom, or their spouse. So I've noticed that. So,
and some people just can't shut up.
but I know they would. Some of the stuff they told me, I know they wouldn't tell. I don't think they was that.
Whereas me, on the other hand, I was on a trip over spring break for a conference, and for the first time tried out Waymo. Has anybody used Waymo?
Was there no person in there at all?
No person at all. Amazing.
Really?
I didn't have to have small talk. Some joker that felt obligated to talk to me. I didn't trust it any less than humans driving. It was just an interesting experience. I literally went and saw the Grand Canyon for the first time on this trip, and Waymo was just as fascinating to me. I was like, I had tried to get an Uber, and Uber, I guess, partners with them, and they're like, if you want to go faster, here's a Waymo, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do it.
Was it an electric car or was it a combustion?
Electric. It's a Jaguar. They were all Jaguars, but I'm sure it was a specific one made just on these contracts. But anyway, it was fun. But like my personality is, if you know me well, like it's funnier because it's like, oh, I don't have to do small talk.
No, about
like-
10-15% of the people I picked up, they didn't want to talk.
But then the majority of people is like, this is freaks me out. I was telling my brother about it. And he would be like, I had no way I couldn't do that. I'm like, yeah, I know, because you can't shut up. So I put this, I do this training for industry because ultimately, when I come at emotional intelligence, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how does this make me a better leader? It certainly has plenty of applications to life in general. But I always try to have activities that bring it back to how do I use this in the work world to make me a better leader? And I do truly believe that being able to have those conversations effectively, the life story, the dreams conversation, the action plan, are absolutely critical in making you a good leader. Having them with yourself helps you have the conversations, but it also greatly increases your self-awareness. I spend a lot of time in my head. I don't watch a lot of TV unless it's sports. I avoid small talk. So like I spend a lot of time being introspective. And so like I think about lots of things that have happened in my life. And until I read this book and said, what if I put them in chronological order? What story does that tell? That's what the life story is. So it's not just saying, tell me about your life or knowing, it's like, no kidding, I know about what my life is, I've done it. But it's putting it in chronological order and also thinking about your emotional well-being at any given time to start to try to identify if there's any commonalities or patterns of behavior that tell you something about yourself. If you're having this conversation with someone else, can you identify those patterns that maybe they don't even identify themselves, ultimately to reveal some sort of core set values? And so a great way, in the book, Russ Laraway recommends starting it with the phrase, starting with kindergarten, tell me about your life. I like to start it with one of the first things I ask you in every class that I have when we do like participation number 3 or 4, and we have a discussion thread. And one of the questions is like, share that's about you, your name, your hometown, whatever. Do you have pets? What did you want to be when you grow up? Because I'm trying to understand the life story, not from a tell me everything that's ever happened to you, gossip perspective, but how did you get here where you're currently at professionally based on what you said you wanted to do when you grow up? Because major things happened along the road that drove you to make decisions. And if you reflect and think about those critical decisions, it tells you a lot about yourself. And as a leader, if I can have that conversation, I can learn a lot about my team. And I just know from having, like I said, I reflect on different individual events that have happened in my life. If you ask me that question, if you're having that conversation, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I grew up on a small farm. We had cows. I was around animals. I've always loved dogs. All animals. I'm just partial to dogs. I like cats. I like any mammal, any warm-blooded mammal that isn't a snake, or like I'm a big fan of. So as a kid, if you had asked me from the first time I remember anyone asking me, up until my junior year of high school, I would have said I want to be a veterinarian. Then I worked at a veterinarian after my junior year of high school, major event that changed my professional direction. And I realized I couldn't see sick animals all the time. And I couldn't deal with the situations that caused them to be sick and the people and their neglect that led to that. And I just made a decision that I can't come home heartbroken every day. I need to do something that doesn't involve emotion, and ended up in engineering. Now I'm teaching about emotional intelligence. It's crazy, isn't it? But that was a inflection point. And there was plenty of things that happened in my life between them. But if someone just said, It's always interesting to have the conversation of what did you want to be when you grow up? What are you doing right now? Rarely are they doing that. And even if they are doing exactly what they said they wanted to be when they grow up, either they didn't have big dreams when they were a kid, or it didn't look like this. It wasn't a straight line, even if they eventually got there. So understanding what that journey looked like, even if you did get to where you wanted to be, I doubt it was a smooth road. What was your emotional well-being during those major events that got you there? Then I changed where I went to school. Was one, I was already applying to vet schools, which a lot of places, then I had to look at different schools for engineering. No one else had ever gone to college before, so that was kind of a theme in the conversation. And then I was applying. I was going to go to Alabama or Penn State. Actually, was the other one. And then like my mother got cancer my senior year of high school. I decided to stay closer to home so I could help out. My dad worked nights. I could drive back and forth. That changed where I went. That changed where I ended up professionally. Thinking about where I was and what drove my decisions and my behavior there tells me a lot about my values. Then other major, I'm not trying to tell my life story. I'm just trying to give you an example of the things you want to pull out of these conversations. They're not easy conversations to have. You have to build trusting relationships for them to be effective. But a good place to start self-awareness is to have them with yourself. And as you're doing it, take time to say what emotions, now that we've talked about them, are actually being evoked as I'm thinking about my life story. You have a chance to do that if you choose on one of the participation badges. I even gave you, and so I usually have a little timeline template that basically is kind of broken up, and you don't have to come up with something in every phase. Just think about, I always say, start with what did you want to be when you grow up? How did you feel as a child when you were thinking about that? Some people may have been low, some people may have been high. What were the major events? Place those on where you were age-wise. When those major events that happened that changed the direction that ultimately got you to your current role. And what was your emotional well-being? What emotions are evoked when you're thinking about it currently? But with the whole goal of when you put it in chronological order, what story does that tell you? And what set of core values can you pull out of that? And so just like when we talked about with organizational values, when we were talking back in class 2.1, the soft part of strategic planning, vision, mission, values. And we said, well, values from the organizational standpoint, you shouldn't have a whole lot of them, or if you have a lot of values, you have no actual core values. Same thing personally. And the thing with values is what are the true ones? They're not the values you think you should have. You know, I really value integrity, or I really value trust, but I sure don't trust anyone. They're not the values your friends or family think you should have. Hey, you grew up in this type of household. You should value this, or you should value this. Or society, they love telling us what we're supposed to value. But the things that actually do drive your decisions and have taken a role in shaping your life, those are the things, if you reflect on it, that are your actual values. So going through that exercise is a strong part of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. And so just like we talked about with organizational values, the more specific we can be about those, the more real they become. I could say that I value passion through simplicity. What does that even mean? But if I am a little, or I could say simplicity, or I could say passion through simplicity. This was one of mine. I realized that I value simplicity. But then I realized I added, I actually value the passion that simplicity brings. And then to be a little more specific, I think simplicity magnifies substance. And if you have passion about everything, you're not passionate about anything. So simplicity makes you value simple, the few strong qualities that exist. For example, I had a friend from out of town, from the Dallas area this weekend. Got a buddy that has a pizza place that I think some of the best pizza around, Valentina's, famous Joe Carlucci. Known him for a long time. We trained jujitsu together. Yeah. Joe's an interesting dude. Like I said, I trained jujitsu with him starting about a decade ago. I met him. He's a passionate guy, New York Italian guy. Has a tattoo that says "Pizza for Life" on his chest. Like he's a fascinating guy. I think they've got some amazing pizzas. So I took my buddy out there. I said, "You can order what you want. I'm going to make you eat a piece of cheese pizza first, because if that's good, you can cover up bad pizza with toppings. But if you're going to judge pizza, simplicity. I drink my coffee black, so I better buy good coffee. You can add a bunch of stuff to cheap coffee and make it taste like stuff. So I value simplicity. I've learned how to drink whiskey neat, so you better have good stuff or get used to bad stuff, one of the two. So be specific, and being specific about your values is important.
We had to say what our values are, but I mean, that really is just social desirability bias.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna write that I value chaos. You know, something like that, because
Right.
it means there are like a free online, I know, because you send us to different, online tools.
Mhm.
Free online thing that'll come out and say, here's your top 4 values.
I don't know. Good question.
Interesting, because I can't remember what I put, but
Yeah. And nobody would if you write it. But that's a good point, because we did this back when we did organizational values, right? Like I asked you to list some, and then I paired you up and you tried to find common ones with other people. And some of you and your teams even said that that's how y'all arrived at your team values on the group project, was everybody having a personal list and then trying to find commonalities. Not everybody told me that's how you came up with it, but I did see it. But then this made me, I can't speak for, look at values in a different way when I started looking at how this book approached values. Because it really did make me say, I'm supposed to say that I value this. And I'm not saying it's not important. But there's a difference in thinking something's important and it being an actual personal value that plays a major role in your decisions all the time. It's kind of like charitable causes. No, I don't think anybody's going to say saving kids from cancer is not a valiant cause. I hope no one would say that. I don't think there's lots of charitable causes that you can absolutely believe are very vital. That doesn't mean they have to be your causes that you give to. Just like I'm not going to judge you if you don't want to give your life savings to save bulldogs and make sure they have homes. That doesn't make me think that you hate them. But that's my cause. That's my value. And that doesn't discount that other ones are not important. So that's the difference in saying, I do think that's important. And this is an actual personal value of mine that shapes who I am. It's not as easy as this. And so I do think, if you're doing this with yourself, whether you write it down or not, question the intent of the exercise and try to identify what those really are. It is. And so if it's hard to have with yourself, and that's part of the reason I gave this assignment or just adopted this book to integrate into this part of the class, which I started last year. I used to use something different. Was as I started doing this training with industry, I think this is absolutely a great skill for a leader to have, is having this life story with their people. I started saying, try to have it with yourself to get better at having that conversation with others. because it's not even easy to have with yourself. And who knows your life better than you? So even then, it's hard to put it down. And even after you put it down, it's hard to pull values out. But as a leader, if I can have these conversations with my people and help them understand their values, then I'm probably helping them develop. So other parts of self-awareness, I'll switch gears. Various assessments. I'm a junkie for this kind of thing. Not just personality assessments, but anyhow, I like taking tests and self-evaluations of different types. I like learning about myself. I like knowing pieces of information. So I'm going to put a disclaimer on my personal opinion because I'm going to get into something that I help improve self-awareness because it helped improve mine. Not only self-awareness, but social awareness of other people is personality assessments. And I will put the disclaimer that I'm also saying use these as one piece of information to improve awareness, not as an AI algorithm to classify people without having to get to know them. Use it as one piece of information, not a way to say, oh, you're this. I just simplified you into one of 16 people, and you have to do this type of job. I'm not saying do that. No matter how many times I say, don't do that. And I'm covering personality assessments just from a self-awareness standpoint. Somebody will just look at the slides and not watch the lecture and go, yeah, but I think personality assessments are a bunch of crap because you can't block people into this. Like you didn't listen to my lecture. My suggestion is there's no way you can go through these and not improve your self-awareness. Who else done a personality assessment of some sort? More common.
Do we have one for an assignment?
Today.
Today, yeah.
Yep. So there's a lot of, the very first one I ever was exposed to, my first year out of college in this job as a young research engineer, we had a lady who was very experienced in administering strategic plans and executive coaching, and she had gotten certified to administer the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but I'll take it. And it was this long assessment, and I took it, and then she gave us this big printout. This was in 2000 or 2001, somewhere in that ballpark. And I was like, wow, this is pretty eerie. Even at that age, 22, I was like, this is pretty accurate. So then I'm skeptical, right? Oh, this is like a horoscope. You could hit vagueness enough that no matter which one I got, I probably could relate to. But then I started reading descriptions of some of the others, and I'm like, nope, that's not me. I am not these other things. And funny enough, this is not kidding. What I've scored on that, I've taken versions of that many times over the 20-something years that have followed, and pretty much every single time I scored the same thing. Now, not everyone does, and we'll look at why in a minute. But regardless of, I'm not advocating for one type of assessment. I listed a bunch of common ones. What I'm saying is your self-awareness can improve by tinkering with some of these. And what really stood out to me, Southern boy, not knowing a lot of people or having not gone many places, it helped me understand groups of people I never could understand why they thought and did things the way they do. People with different types of personality. Me and my brother, same DNA, same mother, same father, two different personalities. We go hang out. We see people that we knew growing up. I'm hiding, hoping they don't see me, looking down. He's calling them over. And I'm like, would you just... two different personality types. Now I understand why somebody would act that foolish. And so there's different ones. I'll talk about some of these, but I even have links in the, yeah, one of the personality or one of the participation badges for today is to do the 16personalities.com version. So the Myers-Briggs type indicator is based on work from Carl Jung, psychologist Carl Jung. It's Jungian psychology and personality archetypes. The 16 personalities uses the same nomenclature that the Myers-Briggs does, but it's really based more on the big five personality trait theory, which is the commonly accepted in the psychology field as the most reliable, that's held up to in research the most, personality trait theory. So personality traits are a set of individual traits that on a continuum, we all have preferences. And the general consensus is there's five. And so the acronym to remember all five, you can use either ocean or canoe. They're the same five letters. And then we'll get to this in a minute, but a personality type, as opposed to trait, a personality type is a mixture of those traits that says if you've got this trait, this trait, this trait, and this trait, then you're this type. So the big five personality traits, the O stands for openness. And so these are on a scale. So the word itself, there's not a better or worse. It's just this personality trait, openness. How open is someone to different experiences, abstract concepts that don't make sense, things that buck the norm? Either I'm not very open to it or I am. That's a personality trait. Where do I fall on that? Conscientiousness is the C. Conscientiousness. What level of self-discipline and impulse control do I have? The E stands for extroversion. How outward, how much do I seek attention from the outside world? What's my social activity level? How much energy do I need the outside world to give me versus how much do I have internal? And again, that's a continuum of low to high. That doesn't mean good to bad or bad to good. The A is agreeableness. How much do I desire harmony and cooperation? And the N, our friend, the personality trait of neuroticism. Emotional stability. Not if I experience anxiety, depression, or anger, like I said, we all do to different degrees. How well do I manage? How stable am I when I do experience
I've seen studies that say, lots of studies that say people, the more agreeable people are, they tend to make less money.
it? Interesting. I'm in academia where nobody makes money and they disagree all the time too.
Well, relative, like just from the broad perspective, there's a psychologist, what's his name? Canadian guy, I can't think of his name. But yeah, apparently that's pretty sound.
So there's one of the links I gave you, and it wasn't, I gave you the participation badge to do the 16 personalities because I find it's interesting. I also gave you a link if you want to do the big five personality trait and see where you fall on each of those five scales, see which one's more dominant, and that tends to influence overall, have more influence on your overall behavior. Now, personality types, which is where Carl Jung came into play. were archetypes based on a combination of different personality traits. In other words, he said this terminology did not exist, but there's a lot of crossover that we'll look at in a minute. But basically, he said, here's these different personality traits. If you score high on one, low on one, we group those together. If you have these, that's one type. And people who have this mixture of traits form a type. And so there was based on your attitude. There's introversion, extroversion. I'm going to talk about the difference in these in a minute. Your functions with the theory that there's 16 different groups of personality traits or personality types based on mixtures of traits. And that was what the Myers-Briggs was built off of. So the first trait that can be mixed in personality type is based on where we prefer to draw our energy. How do we interact? And it's either an I or an E, introversion or extroversion. So in personality trait theory, the trait they called introversion, but the continuum is really, or the trait they called extroversion, but the continuum we measured on is really introversion to extroversion. Introverts draw energy from within and are drained by the outside. People strong on the extrovert scale of the continuum are drained in isolation and need outside stimulation. So every time I've ever taken any type of personality assessment, based on what I've probably already said, you can guess I'm very strong. Of any of the scales, I'm strongest on the introvert to extrovert scale, to the introvert side. So introvert and extrovert do not mean potentially what people commonly think they mean. I have to talk for a living. I do talk for a living. So like I'm an introvert, but that doesn't mean I hide in a cave and don't know how to interact. It means I draw my energy from within. I live in my own head. I don't think about doing things in the outside world very often. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy them. If somebody says, hey, Nick, go with me to do this, I very much can enjoy it. I just don't need it. And chances are hard, where some people need, I want to go to that concert. I want to feel that energy. And if I don't, I'm drained. Whereas I'm like, I'll go and I'll have fun at that concert, but I'll be drained when I get back. And I've also known plenty of extroverts in engineering, believe it or not, who just desire stimulation from the outside, but don't know how to engage. Leads to a lot of more complicated emotions. So introvert versus extrovert is just a preference in how we draw our energy, internally or externally. Another personality type that gets weighed in is sensing versus intuition. How do we process information? When we process information, what do we pay attention to the most? Sensing is, do we use our senses? Smell, touch, taste, sight. What I'm taking in. Intuition is I pay more attention to patterns, inferences, meanings, versus down to earth, sense, smell. What do I weigh the most when I make decisions? The T stands for thinking and the F stands for feeling. If I score strong on the T factor of this continuum, I make decisions based on seeking truth or rationale, rational logic over emotion. Whereas feeling seeks to make decisions based on the views of everybody, empathy, harmony, that's what they value. And again, some people can be right in the middle. Like these are a continuum. Some people score stronger on some than others. The closer you are to the middle on these, the more likely you are if you took this for it to flip flop depending on what mood. And the last trait in Jungian society's personality type theory is our orientation to the outer world. J is judging. And it's important to understand the real definitions of these terms, not just what we think they mean. Judging in this case isn't like I'm judging you. It is we interact with the outside world, try to be decisive, organized. There's cut and dry. A lot of project managers are like this. And then perceiving, the P, is adaptable, flexible, improvise, not necessarily one best way to go about it. So judging interacts with the outside world with the intent to make decision. Perceiving tends to interact with the outside world to just gain information out of curiosity. And so when you mix all those together, you get a personality type. And so those do map cleanly. If the big five personality traits are across the top, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeable, and neuroticism, then the scales of the Jungian archetypes from Myers-Briggs, introvert, extrovert maps to extroversion, intuitive versus sensing maps to openness, thinking, feeling maps to agreeableness, judging and perceiving maps to conscientiousness. And then the 16 personalities, which the questions, 16 personalities assessment that I ask you to do uses the nomenclature of the better known Myers-Briggs, but it actually is based on the big five. The questions it asks are measuring the big five personality traits. So they added a fifth one called assertiveness or turbulence, which maps to neuroticism, which means how emotionally stable are you. So it kind of mixes the best of all of those. Measures the psychology, what psychology accepts right now is the most reliable personality trait theory, the big five, and measures those big five, but then uses the nomenclature that people are more familiar with from the Myers-Briggs to give you a personality type. So I hope you have fun with it. If you've done them before, do it again, see how accurate it is. Like I said, depending on, I'm strong on the introversion scale, so no matter how many times I take this, I'm always going to be an I. I'm pretty strong on the N, but probably 2/3 of the way toward N. I'm kind of in the middle, but definitely in the T on thinking to feeling, but closer to the middle. I'm very in the middle with perceiving or perspecting is what 16 personalities calls it, and judging. And that really affects the roles I end up taking or the with teams, because if I have to be something that a INTJ is more common to do, I can, but if I'm working with somebody that's better at that, I prefer to be an INTP because I can flex that last letter more easily than I can the others. So just in case you're wondering, if when you do take it, how common is your personality type versus others? There's a distribution of it. In general, I've done it in my class before. The first few years I've done this, I took the types of the class and actually looked at it versus this, and very often it's a little different. This is a worldwide, I believe. But the bigger point I want to make on personality is I like to cover this stuff as part of self-awareness. We talked about last week, the three parts of the psyche: IQ fixed unless you have some traumatic brain injury or brain transcendence into another world where you get smarter. You have personality, which is also fixed. And then we have emotional intelligence, which you can develop those skills and increase, which is why it's such a critical leadership skill. But very often, personality may seem like somebody has, quote, changed their personality. And in effect, what they possibly have done is change their behaviors, which is not personality. Personality is a preference, a set of preferences on these traits. The stronger you score on the continuum, the stronger your preference is to be one versus the other. But that doesn't mean that you can't change behavior against those preferences to exhibit behaviors more in line with someone on the other side. It's just hard to do. And when left to our own, we will always revert back to our preferences. Think about writing with your dominant hand. Some people are ambidextrous and can go close. I had a college professor who could write with both hands. He'd do math with this hand, then he would get over here and he would just swap hands. Drove me nuts. I'm left-handed, pretty strongly left-handed. Can do a few things with my right hand. I can do a jab with my right hand. So I leave with it first. Much more coordinated with my left. So I have a dominant hand. That's how I write my name. If I broke my hand, unfortunately, I still have to sign things. I can probably write my name and can with my right hand. Am I as efficient? No. When my left hand heals, am I going to keep writing my hand with my right name? No, I'm going to go back to what I prefer. Personality traits are the same. So when someone's behavior changes, it may seem like they change their personality. One, emotional intelligence is more responsible behaviors based on the same preferences. But then I can also, depending on how strong I am on one of these continuums, fake a preference for a short period of time, but I always will go back to what I'm comfortable with. That's what true personality traits are. Or another example I can give is I can walk around the room. I can see. I can dodge things effectively, right? All my senses are huge. If the lights went out and it was pitch black, I'd probably still navigate around the room. You have to be feeling, listening a little closer. I'm not going to be moving as quickly. I'm probably still going to bump into things. If the lights come back on, I'm probably going to stop navigating the room that way and go back to that's what a personality trait is. There are preferences to some degree on a continuum of those traits, and when you combine them, that creates a personality trait. So part of self-awareness is just learning to identify your emotions as they happen. Understanding your mental model helps with that. Leaps of abstraction, distorted thoughts, understanding what those are. I didn't cover the Johari window, don't worry about that. The ability to lead the life story conversation is important. Having it with yourself helps with your social awareness, personality types, and traits that are out there are effective too. I'm going to start a little bit on self-management. I'm not going to go through everything tonight because I've been going for a while. I want to at least introduce it, and we'll pick up from there next week. Because once we develop self-awareness, we want to use that. It's not okay to just be self-aware if you aren't willing to improve. It's not okay. And self-awareness is, I know I smell bad. But it's not enough to know you smell bad if you're not willing to take a bath. I used to have a picture of my dog in a bathtub, and that was her strategy tip. It's one thing to know you stink, but if you're not willing to take a bath, you don't have good self-management. Self-management is the ability to use awareness of your emotions to choose what you say. And it's just been fun playing karaoke with my blanks, having to, in real time, remember what's supposed to be in there. In the original, Dan Goleman was the first person to really get popular talking about emotional intelligence and leadership. And then we talked about this last week, but his original emotional intelligence theory called it, there was self-awareness, but he called it self-regulation. Now that you identify your emotions, how well can you regulate them as you identify they're happening? Which comes into behavior, right? The fifth discipline with mental models, going back to the skills of reflection and inquiry. Part of self-management is understanding espoused theory versus theory in use. We touched on this when we talked about mental models, but espoused theory is, here's what I say I believe. Theory in use is, here's what I actually do. And the fourth of the 5 disciplines that we'll introduce in class is personal mastery, which basically puts us up against that espoused theory and theory of use and says there's different ways to address that gap in what you say and what you do. One is change what you say to be more in line with what you actually do. Or change what you do to be more in line with what you actually say. Seek the truth. That's not saying one or the other is better. It's just saying reconcile those two, and understanding having the life story conversation with yourself can help to do that. What are you really about? All right. We'll get into personal mastery because we'll get deep if I stay much longer. And I've saturated the thought, saturated my own thought process. So I can't imagine what it's like sitting on the other side. But we'll pick up from here next week and finish talking about self-management and get into social awareness as well. March Madness. Games are starting. We all have a good weekend.